GNPC, the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, and former chairman of the New Patriotic Party. I'd like to invite Ambassador D.K. Osei, who's the president of CFR, to give us the opening remarks.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of CFR Ghana, I'd like to welcome all of you as we gather here today to celebrate a momentous occasion. I'm particularly pleased to see the former Vice President of the ICC, Professor Ekuya Konye here, who also happens to be a senior fellow the Council on Foreign Affairs. I think you're welcome. A momentous occasion, the book launch of contemporary issues in foreign policy, diplomacy, and international affairs. It is truly an honor to have each one of you present as we embark on a journey of intellectual exploration and thought-provoking discourse. In this rapidly changing world, where borders become blurred and interconnections prevail, the realms of foreign policy, diplomacies, and ideologies remind us of our shared humanity. Today's launch goes beyond a mere celebration of knowledge. It serves as a platform for fostering dialogue and promoting intellectual growth. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the authors whose generosity with their knowledge and passion made this anthology a reality. I'm sure Dr. Boma will be talking about some of them. To the editorial board, Ambassador Cabral Blay Amir, Ivor Ajimandria, Ambassador Kuya Danswa, I noticed there earlier on, Ambassador Kwame Tinkwai, I noticed him earlier on, Ambassador Edith Hazel and Koku Doche, who nurtured this project with great care, and to each one of you, our distinguished guests, for gracing this occasion with your presence. I particularly like to thank Professor Mensah Bonsu, Ambassador Agriolins, and the Chancellor of the University of Ghana, Mrs. Chinhese, for accepting to be part of this launch at very short notice. I need to apologize to all of you again. In fact, later during today, Mrs. Chinhese will be launching the CFR Memoir Fund. The idea of the fund is to assist retired ambassadors, diplomats, international civil servants, people like Bombande, to write their memoirs so that students can learn from it, like Professor Dia. So this fund will be today launched by the Chancellor of the University of Ghana, Mrs. Chinhese. As we embark on this intellectual journey, embracing the wisdom within these pages and harnessing the power of knowledge to navigate the complex tapestry of foreign policy, diplomacy, and international relations, let us strive for a world that fosters understanding, collaboration, and peace. Thank you once again for your presence at this book launch, and let me take the opportunity to welcome all those who have just joined us by Zoom, particularly the Commissioner for Political Affairs of the AU Commission, Ambassador Dankole. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador D.K. Osei, President of the Council. I'd like to recognize His Excellency Colonel Awoki Panasa, Ambassador of Togo to Ghana. Apologies for omitting you earlier. Also also like to recognize Mr. Kwao Isuman, who is a counsel to the President of Ghana. So I'd like to introduce now the chair for the evening. As I said earlier, she's up on the high table, is very well known, but just a couple of highlights. She's been a career diplomat for many, many, many years, retired now, of course, but she served all over the world, in London, in Brussels, in Addis, in Geneva, in Austria, and of course she excelled. She earned the Order of the Malta, one of the highest awards, and even beyond that, she also received an award from John Paul II, who has since become a saint. Not many people dead or alive have received awards from saints. She these days spends her time supporting causes such as CFR and also UNDP and the Lagos Center for International Affairs and Intellectual Property, World Intellectual Property Organization. But she spends most of her time tending beautiful flowers in her home. But above all, she went to Wesley Girls High School, which is the best school in Ghana after Ajibode School. Ladies and gentlemen, your chair. Will you have a few opening remarks? Yes, please.
Entitled Contemporary Issues in Foreign Policy, Diplomacy and International Affairs, which is a compilation of speeches delivered between 2019 and 2022 under the Distinguished Lecture Series program of the Council, as well as the launch of the Memoirs Project Fund of the Council. I also joined the President of the Council in extending a warm welcome to you all and thank you for accepting the Council's invitation to grace these events with your distinguished presence. In her contribution to the publication, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration, the Honorable Shirley Ayokoboje, emphasized, and I quote, the need to consolidate the guiding principles and objectives of Ghana's foreign policy and diplomatic practices into a handbook that would serve as ready reference to various stakeholders. Of such a handbook. The speeches are delivered by persons of standing drawn from a wide spectrum of professions and backgrounds, from political figures to international civil servants, to writers, to diplomats, constitute a truly international group. The publication captures their thinking on a wide range of issues of moment in international relations, issues such as multilateralism, higher education, the fabric of society, governance, and democracy. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. The publication is carefully and uniquely crewing discussion. It is no ordinary handbook. It combines scholarship and reality, often providing perspectives which are thought-provoking and deepen our appreciation of the issues involved, not only at the level of international relations, but also at the national. Is indeed indispensable for sound decision-making and policy formulation and implementation. It brings us full circle to the statement of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration regarding the need for a ready reference. Contemporary issues in foreign policy, diplomacy, and international affairs is such a ready reference. Cost. The implementation of one of the objectives of the Council, namely the publication of the memoirs of retired diplomats and other professionals, books and articles on international issues. We are completely spoilt for choice. We have 2 launches. I thank you for the courtesy of your attention, and we look at the launch of the Memoirs Project Fund of the Council. I now invite Dr. Frederick Boama to conduct the book review. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Excellencies. Madam Chair, Ambassador Mrs. Agnes Aggrey-Orleans, good evening, Your Excellencies. Madam Chair, Ambassador Mrs. Agnes Aggrey-Orleans, our guest speaker, Her Ladyship Professor Justice Henrietta Mensah Bonsu, our special guest, Dr. Mrs. Mary Chinwe Hesse, to be as brief as possible. However, if I overstay my welcome, please draw my. The book is entitled Contemporary Issues in Foreign Policy, Diplomacy and International Affairs. As the name suggests, it consists of a compilation of scholarship and experiences from a diverse pool of distinguished speakers who have delivered insightful and thought-provoking lectures under the banner of the CFR Distinguished Guest Lecture Series. The publisher of the book, the Council on Foreign Relations Ghana, has carefully selected 18 chapters covering 357 pages of these lectures, and an index for ease of reference. The book is bound in hardcover. The design and artwork that adorns the book is of the highest quality, reminiscent of the quality of its contents. Having said this, I'm sure you are curious to hear about the contents of the book itself. But give me a moment to say a few words about CFR Ghana and the relevance of this book CFR Ghana has a long history, but its current lease of life was bettered in 2019 to backstop and support the government of Ghana in its pursuit of foreign policy and international relations in general in Ghana. As a testament of its role and importance, CFR was launched by the President of the Republic of Ghana with dignitaries such as the current and former foreign affairs ministers, parliamentarians, excellencies like yourselves, members of the diplomatic corps, academicians, traditional leaders, and business leaders, among others. The overarching message from the launch of CFR was excellence and solidarity. And I'm happy to note that a number of you who were at the launch are here today also to support the launch of this all-important book. I'm sure most of you would agree with me that Africa needs to tell its own story, and the existing narrative controlled by Western scholarship and institutions is not in favor of us. Quite clearly, CFR Ghana was launched with a very clear understanding of this mandate and how to achieve same. It was also clear that there was a yearning gap needed in the knowledge production and dissemination in the field of foreign policy, diplomacy, and international affairs. One of the clearest absences from the field of international relations in Ghana and most of Africa is that of think tanks and African-authored books and resources. This book, therefore, is one of the many attempts to fill this gap, and as noted by one of the authors at page 142 of the book, and I quote, learning across time requires literacy, the ability to record what you have done in a way that future generations approach at the end of each author's presentation. This gives the audience an opportunity to probe further on the topic that has been presented, as well as related issues that the author is then invited to comment on and give further insights. Towards this end, I have not just reviewed the author's presentations, but I have also reviewed your contributions that you have made over time towards the presentations that were offered by the various authors. Now to the main work. The book deals with the arguments on colonial boundaries, ethnicity, coup d'etats, and the governance challenges that faces Africa. Let me set the tone looking at the chapter of the book on Afro-pessimism against horizons of a optimism societies, be it formal, informal, in terms of collaborations towards agriculture and production and the trade sector. The book also presents a chapter on Africa-EU alliance. And as we know, the relationship between Africa and the European Union has undergone several dimensions, from colonization, slavery, decolonization, and the abolition of the slave trade, towards donor support, EPA, interim EPA, and the likes. This, the myriad of opportunities for job creation, financing, and empowering the youth and businesses in Africa. It also tackles investments, particularly in renewable energy supplies and sustainability. According to the author, the aim is to create a partnership
responding to global challenges in a fast-changing world. She paints a gloomy but realistic picture thus, quote, "These trends and challenges have produced a crisis of confidence," unquote. After this melancholy-inducing portrait of the state of multilateralism, she ends on a note that she too is a stubborn optimist. I can only whisper with slumped shoulders that I'm a resigned optimist. No real choice otherwise for us in the global south. In this uncertain mix of affairs comes an even more unpredictable phenomenon, the COVID-19 pandemic. This has left us many lessons, some of which are already receding from our consciousness as we return to our old ways of organizing our lives. Despite this reality, COVID the Leveler has taught us that not only is humanity linked in ways that we had overlooked, but that no one has superior answers to life's questions. Captured in common Ghanaian street lingo in the Akan language, Obia and Obia. To which no one has all the answers or holds all the aces. The shock of discovering how little our lives on the continent mattered and how politics could interfere in forging a common Africa. And people who had visited Africa were required to answer a questionnaire as to whether they had engaged in sexual intimacy while in Africa. Africa has remained tagged by its silence and has remained to this day the home continent of HIV/AIDS. Then came an outbreak of a virulent disease named after a location in Uganda, Ebola disease. The very serious outbreak in 3 closely related countries in West Africa, Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, claimed over 11,000 lives because it was largely unknown in West Africa before then. The outbreak was promptly traced to a little boy in Guinea, and the close personal interactions among the closely related people in the 3 countries took the blame for the spread of the disease. No one gave a convincing explanation of how a 3-year-old became the source of the spread, except that the story we are told was that he must have picked up the virus from bats because he used to play on a tree stump visited by bats. Although this stretched credibility somewhat thin, we held our peace and did not counter the narrative or protest at the name. On a personal level, I realized the seriousness of the stigmatization of West Africans when I was nearly put in quarantine while transiting through an airport in Hong Kong en route to Japan because I was from West Africa. I did not think to protest when I returned home, nor see fit to report the incident to anyone, and merely laughed it off. The experience of COVID has taught me that far from being excited that a word in one's language has made it to the international plane, we should have protested about kwashiorkor from Ghana and Lassa fever from Nigeria, so that the diseases would be given proper scientific names and not be used to stigmatize persons from those locations. Thanks to the work of Ambassador William Awinado Kanyerige and Ken Thompson in their very enlightening paper in Chapter 2, COVID-19 and its impact on global affairs, CFR has immortalized the COVID era for Ghanaians and other persons who might have access to this book. Stories from the dim past that once upon a time, a disease tagged as a pandemic called COVID-19 attacked the world and had immeasurable impact on us, on the lives we lived before, might otherwise have sounded mythical. Reading the piece, I certainly could relate to many of the points canvassed and thoroughly discussed by the 2 authors. In February 2021, I delivered a lecture at an international conference organized by the Patrice Lumumba People's Friendship University of Moscow, named Africa and the Formation of the New System of International Relations 2021. The conference was under the general theme, Development Cooperation with Africa in the Post-COVID-19. The title of the paper I was requested to present via Zoom was Managing Conflict and Political Processes Despite COVID. I was intrigued that a Russian university had known where to find me and approached me for a paper on the impact of COVID on conflict processes and political processes. Many universities in Africa were on topics that were not even COVID-related, making me wonder whether the conference organizers had failed to guide authors by insisting on greater fidelity to the theme. In the course of further idle reflection, I decided that Russia was probably readying itself to play a bigger role on the international scene, and that the conference was about soft power interests in Africa post-COVID. Consequently, I repackaged my thoughts on this subject for the benefit of the students at LESIAD at their Wednesday seminar. For it told me that those who were thinking ahead realized that the onset of this disease was a watershed in history. In those lectures, my concentration was on the terrain of conflict and UN's peace operations. In thoughts reminiscent of some of the issues discussed by the two authors in the chapter, I noted that the disease had not merely exposed issues of race, age, and class cleavages within and among countries and regions, but also constraints that it placed on démarches for conflict prevention and peacemaking efforts. The Russian conference served as a forceful reminder that the world never sleeps, and that every event presents opportunities in geopolitics for self-assertion and even hegemonic soft power outreaches. When the war with Ukraine broke out and African countries were being pressured to take sides, my reflection on the purpose of that conference became even more sober. I wondered again and again if COVID and its impact on Africa had been the real reason, or the convenient excuse to plumb the thoughts of African scholars on pertinent matters and ascertain the point of our needs post-COVID. Like every aspect of our lives, the terrain of peace and conflict prevention was badly affected too. When COVID broke and everyone had to resort to Zoom and such other applications to be able to carry on the business of their particular enterprise, so did those involved in ongoing negotiations in conflicts around the world. However, in general terms, some aspects of our lives are easier to conduct from a distance than others. For instance, the good offices of the Secretary General yields the most with in-person interactions and not merely by telephone calls. On 23rd March 2020, the Secretary General called for a global ceasefire to facilitate aid delivery and open space for diplomatic engagement and other peace processes. Although some 110 countries, 24 armed groups, many regional organizations, civil society groups, Pope Francis, and other religious leaders endorsed the call, this initiative and accompanying words of support did not translate into concrete action. The attempt to leverage goodwill towards humanity in the days when the whole of humanity was under attack by a new virus did not appear to have yielded any dividend. Airstrikes went on as if there had been no ceasefires. Again, everyone in the field of conflict prevention and mediation knows what advantage interpersonal interaction and even the personal gravitas of a mediator can achieve in mediation. With COVID, the reality was different, and without in-person contact, or with social distancing and half-covered faces at in-person meetings, how could some intangible personal attributes be brought to bear upon disputing parties? How could body language be read or subtle messages be communicated by non-verbal communication in advance to advance a mediation? Clearly, opportunities for effective conflict prevention and mediation were lost. It had to be observed by staff of multilateral agencies, but non-state actors found it advantageous to be able to operate without restriction, and a number of outrages were perpetrated during that time without effective response. The gap between the words of commitment and concrete deeds to actualize that commitment was more in evidence in those days, thereby giving social distancing a whole new dimension. Thankfully, in-person meetings have become possible again and hopefully should bridge the distancing gap that the pandemic imposed on conflict prevention initiatives. The AU Peace and Security Council, at its 974th meeting held on 22nd January 2021, on the situation in the Great Lakes region, determined that it needed an on-site visit. But the only timeline adopted was, quote and unquote, as soon as possible. Further, At its 979th meeting, held on 16 February 2021 on the situation in the Central African Republic, it was resolved that it was important to show solidarity with the people and government of Central African Republic. Yet the timeline was, quote and unquote, in the near future. It was only late in April 2021 that concrete plans could be made to perform these on-site visits. The time lost may have made a difference to subsequent events. Peacekeeping budgets went out of sync as funds had to be diverted from operations to provide for the safety and health of personnel, not to mention the hostility that was generated towards peacekeepers who were perceived to be the purveyors of this imported disease by host communities. And so they had to extend some of their largesse to the host communities to assuage them. These were very troubling times indeed, which perhaps might have been best forgotten or consigned to the items that labor under cultural prohibitions of the unmentionables in Akan Amodin. However, we bury these memories at our peril. And this chapter eloquently points out some of the lessons that we cannot and ought not to forget. On a lighter note, during my presidential address at the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences on Zoom in November 2020, I reminded the audience that COVID had produced a number of incongruous situations worth preserving. I noted that, to my mind, the most incongruous was where gatemen at banks and other public locations, armed with temperature guns, were having to take the body temperature of doctors before deciding whether it was safe to let them into the premises. Thanks to this chapter in the CFR publication, these memories and the lessons therefrom will keep alive as time pushes them off our consciousness. Ken Thompson's observations and economic predictions have turned out to be prophetic and have all come to pass. His constant reference to cloud and silver lining to remind us that valuable opportunities have opened up which we must not let go, must receive attention. For instance, in those days, we were obliged to learn to do business by alternative means, and this must stay with us. Certainly, the online ordering and delivery business appears to have responded. There were dire predictions by foreign experts of how many of us poor Africans would die and how bodies might litter the streets of African cities for want of any survivor to bury the dead. This prediction did not come to pass, and as scientists grappled with the possible causes of their failed prophecies, the conclusion, and blithely so, was that data from Africa was unreliable anyway, and that we had many more dead than we were willing to own up to the international community. This explanation did not gel with the observed facts, and it did not explain why satellite images were not showing up many new graves in our cemeteries, even if we were not willing to mourn our dead kith and kin in order to deceive the world. When Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General, was asked about it by Kwaku Sechiado, I take a bow. After her presentation on multilateralism at 75, what next? In chapter 6, her answer was, as a Nigerian, you know we will say it is God's will. But on a serious note, I think that this is not by chance, unquote. She then put it down to how practiced African leaders are in fighting constantly erupting emergencies since the continent had learned from the Ebola crisis, a kind of gym for our leaders to strengthen their muscles. Lo and behold, there was a real scientific explanation, and now propounded by Professor Gordon Awandari of the University of Ghana and his team of virologists. In the course of learning about this disease in order to bring it under control, our universities had the opportunity to secure funds to conduct research to sequence the genes of the variants circulating in the country. Out of this opportunity for research funding has come convincing answers to the question people had to concede they could not explain. These answers, now published, show that there is a definite inverse correlation between the incidence of deaths by serious COVID and areas of endemic malaria. They have also determined that the reason was probably because malaria trained our immune systems, and that had aided our bodies to fight off the virus. Africa must begin to claim the necessary credit for the discoveries of its scientists, because we are not just consumers of other people's research. I have come across a historical narrative that the smallpox virus was discovered because a West African slave in Boston told his master that in West Africa they use cowpox, liquid from cowpox, and that protected people from smallpox. And they investigated, and Boston was saved. He remains nameless, and it's such a shame. The chapters that focus on intrastate conflict of the various countries all present serious learning points for all our countries. The roles of non-state actors are highlighted. The unanticipated eruption of intrastate wars in the 1980s and 90s challenged the instruments the international community had designed for dealing with conflict between and among its member states, all of whom were subject to international law. Being members of international community, it meant that there were mechanisms for exacting compliance and points of pressure which could be activated to produce desired outcomes when powerful state actors were found to be out of step with the norms of the community. The failure of the UN to intervene in events that culminated in the genocide in Rwanda caused a major shift in approach to intrastate conflict. The addition of genocide to causes that could constitute, quote and unquote, threats to international peace and security, thereby brought intrastate conflict into the fold of causes that would warrant intervention by the international community. Identifying and deeming such powerful state actors as bearing the greatest responsibility for human rights abuses led to the adoption of new war crimes and crimes against humanity, such as ethnic cleansing, rape as a weapon of war, and recruitment of child soldiers, thus joining the old existing ones of genocide and mass murder. I take a bow, Professor Kwenye here. I'm talking of the ICC. The emergence of leaders who were in opposition to state officials, that is, powerful non-state actors in intrastate conflicts, dictated other shifts in approach, such as their inclusion of sanction regimes like arms embargoes and travel bans, which had been designed for state actors. However, the new protagonists, the non-state actors, were and are of a different caliber. They were not always well educated and may have been thrust into leadership by their propensity and capacity to use violence. Some persons were even sometimes unaware of a legal regime of humanitarian law and of human rights. They did not have foreign bank accounts or other financial interests abroad, nor did they have any reason to travel out of their localities. How effective were these age-old instruments going to be in putting them under pressure to join the negotiation table? The need to examine these instruments and fashion out new tools has thus become preeminent. I speak of the UN peace operations, but I can sense the sapping of energy in the room, and so I'm moving on. but it is provided in writing, so the Secretariat can make it available to those who are interested. I should go on? You are sure they brought their bedding? In 2014, the Secretary General of the UN appointed a high-level independent panel on peace operations, the HIPPO, to examine the terrain of peacekeeping and conflict resolution by the UN and make appropriate recommendations. The HIPPO, on which I was privileged to serve in 2014-2015, coincided with the appointment of two other panels by the General Assembly to review the implementation of Security Council reform, Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and to advise the UN's peace-building agenda. And I believe that Ambassador Chambers referred to it in his paper. These three reviews operated concurrently and so were able to profit from synergies of joined-up consultations. Indeed, the chair and one other member of the 1325 panel were full-fledged members of HIPPO as well, and this made for easy and meaningful linkages. The report presented in June 2015 reaffirmed the basic tenets of the UN peacekeeping of consent, impartiality, and non-use of force except in self-defense and defense of the mission's mandate. The report also recommended that the one-size-fits-all approach to peace operations and peace building should be jettisoned in favor of a situation-specific design. To this end, a peacekeeping mission did not have to be one type of intervention as has traditionally been the case. It need not be a military one only, or even a multi-dimensional one, but could be a police one in situations where policing was more an issue than the execution of military tasks. And I know Haiti has benefited from that in times past. The panel was to make recommendations to enhance the performance of the UN. It was from our recommendations that the restructuring of the UN Secretariat was advocated, and the name change of peace operations was proposed to enable the peacekeeping budget to support mediation and other conflict prevention measures and activities. This was because by 2014, the Secretariat was using up to 25% of its budget and extra budgetary resources on political affairs alone. And it was clear that the situation was not only untenable, but unsustainable. To support proposals for reform of the structures, the UN's responses to addressing threats to peace and its conflict resolution could not operate as fragmented and siloed responses belonging to DPKO and DPA as they were known then, but as a continuum. This was the reason the name change of peace operations came into being, and not because, according to Commissioner Adeola, the UN was copying the AU, which had always used peace support operations. The HIPPO report also discouraged the UN from engaging in peace enforcement or other offensive military action because such actions would violate the Capstone Doctrine. It would also make it a party to the war and shrink the space for its political role of mediation and use of good offices in supporting the restoration of peace. The recommendation was that the UN was to draw the line at peace enforcement and pull back from offensive action despite its own involvement in the Force Intervention Brigade in MONUSCO, which had an offensive mandate. We discouraged the UN from going that route. Admittedly, the FIB was very popular with the local people. That was the first time they saw action from UN. But it was also a fact that such a peacekeeping mission's mandate could not sit well with a peace enforcer's mandate within the same space. Apart from shrinking the space for political mediation between the parties, it also made the Blue Helmets a target for attack by warring factions who could not be expected to distinguish between those with offensive mandate and those with peacekeeping mandate. It was also noted that factually, the configuration of UN peacekeeping troops made it unsuitable to engage in offensive action. To this end, where there was a need for offensive action, the UN should work with partners such as regional bodies or coalitions of the willing and leave such action to them. Upon assuming office, the current Secretary General put out a reworked vision in the new initiative called Agenda for Peace, A4P, to work through what it all meant to restructure the Secretariat as recommended and to support a change in the positioning of UN's peace operations. Ironically, this appears not to have improved the perception of the ineffectiveness of peace operations, leading to the recent withdrawal of consent by the government of Mali and the subsequent ordering out of troops from MINUSMA. Partnership with African Union. The framers of the Charter of the UN, in confiding world peace and security to the Security Council, also anticipated that regional bodies would come into their own sometime in the future, and accordingly provided for such eventuality in Chapter 8 of the Charter. In his address on AU response to emerging continental security threats, the Commissioner for Peace and Security, His Excellency Bankole Adeoye, I believe he's online, spoke about the fact that the resolution of AU's problems lies in peace enforcement and not peacekeeping, and so the UN is becoming irrelevant in Africa. I was saddened by this posture because it was on account of that reality that the Secretary General set up the HIPPO in the first place. The resort to Chapter 8 of the UN Charter as the basis for partnership meant that the UN would aid and support and lend support to the AU to enable it to do what it appears to be the best option in certain circumstances in support of the efforts of the UN Security Council. It was clear then that the Somalia model of support through UNSOM and logistics through UNSOA, now UNSOS, was the favored model. What the AU officials at the time were concerned about was the fact that they were not involved in the planning of missions and were never consulted even when missions were rehearted. On its part, the UN Secretariat was concerned The AU Commissioner rightly pointed out that the problems of 30 years ago are different from the problems of today. That is largely true. In these days, the international community is wrestling with not only the existing challenges, but also newer and more potent which have been met to complicate matters and uncomfortable situations. The decade that followed these fundamental shifts in world affairs also coincided with the development and exponential growth of new communication technology. These have increased access to new ideas wheresoever placed, and to global social networks. The global mobilization of opinion jumped in the CNN effect after the development of the 24-hour news network CNN. has been occasioned by technology that has enabled the horrors and generated globalized strident calls for the UN to intervene, even when it is institutionally inappropriate to do so. The new information and communication technologies have not been an unalloyed blessing. Access to the technology of social media has made it possible for the disaffected around the world to link up and join forces and recruit new adherents in far-flung areas of operations in various parts of the world, while democratizing power. The modus operandi for achieving maximum capacity and the use of violence to achieve political goals, otherwise known as terrorism. From heavy weapons indiscriminately used to human bombs deliberately detonated in crowded areas to cause maximum casualties, there has been no lack of technological innovation to make any horrors dreamed up impossible to achieve. On its part, social media has facilitated the ability to mobilize support for ideas or to radicalize young people, thereby expanding such notions of quote and unquote them versus us that underlies every demonstrations in aid of little understood political and social causes. These virtually leaderless demonstrations have presented problems for policing around the world and confounded the age-old theories about crowd control, usually social media has also enabled the spread of information on the production of home-based weapons, disinformation of all kinds to inflame passions, particularly of the youth, conspiracy theories to undermine faith in public institutions and other organs of state. I am informed that the generation that was raised on the power of the written word, that is us, the generation raised on the power of the written word, or as they put it in pidgin English, book no lie, are the most vulnerable. For having been socialized to trust information in writing, we believe everything we read on social media and happily pass it on to friends and relatives. Conspiracy theories of COVID and COVID vaccination have revealed to us the damage that could be caused by the ability to generate information and circulate without any gatekeeping, as used to be the case with news editing, and even social accountability as exacted by the spoken word. As pointed out by the AU Commissioner, the Sahel is a major headache at this time. And I say a lot about the Sahel, which you will find in the book. I skip to Professor Wole Soyinka has hit the nail right on the head when in his contribution on Afro-pessimism, he points out an obvious truth, that it is impossible to marshal any but military responses to these groups in the Sahel, since their goals are to achieve a redrawing of the map of West Africa and install a caliphate. Such maximalist goals admit of no moderation. For how can one persuade them to set their sights lower than that and aim for half a caliphate, if there is any such? Again, who are the leaders with whom one could negotiate, even if one found the option attractive? Since the identities of their leaders are shrouded in mystery, how could anybody purport to negotiate with an organization with no known leaders? Apart from the odd leadership struggle that occasionally makes its way into the news, there is general lack of genuine and credible information as to who is in charge. These realities notwithstanding, the continued use of indiscriminate violence puts everyone at risk, and even kidnappings, and they put pressure on states to act to protect their territories and their citizens. Then I talk of the design of the ASF and how it has become inappropriate because these warring groups don't operate according to regions. and it has necessitated the development of new mechanisms. The AU Commissioner indicated that although ECOWAS had deployed troops to Gambia and Guinea-Bissau, that effort did not count since it was not under the ESF. I read that part of his presentation over and over again because I could not believe that we would engage in terms on such issues instead of seeking cooperation and incorporation. Not to be outdone in complicating the terrain of peace and security in West Africa, the governments of Mali and Burkina Faso have enlisted the assistance of the Russian mercenary military group, the Wagner Group, and have chased out French. With the Wagner Group itself recently caught up in some confusion in the nature of the mutiny against its state military handlers, it is unclear what the import of that manifestation will be on the sub-region. For the sub-region, the very presence of a foreign mercenary force is discomforting enough and presents new security challenges for governments and their security setups. Such leadership denoted intra-group power struggles can easily degenerate into the formation of splinter groups with consequent issues of command and control over elements that could turn rogue if not speedily reined in. Foreign fighters being recruited to fight in these wars has meant that powerful arms find their way into their countries of origin or nearby countries to which they resort as safe havens. It is no secret that arms supplied to fighters in Libya eventually found their way southward and destabilized the Sahel. This has caused me some anxiety since I heard of cluster bombs in Ukraine, for they will soon find their way into these parts if not firmly controlled. The question is related to the integrity deficit in our governance that we lament so often. If it is true that many politicians cut their teeth in student politics on the various campuses, then this is not a challenge that can be addressed by the imposition of criminal penalties only. How many student governments leave office without one scandal or the other pertaining to the mishandling of student government? I'm sure you remember your days on campus, and we shall uproot them like cassava. Therefore, catch them young must be less of a catchphrase and more of a call to action and integrity in the political class that has to be built up in educational institutions. Thank you, Ashesi, for showing the way. Hopefully, that model will be could use some of the ethical tutoring that Ashesi offers its students. In chapter 3, which I will avoid at this hour, indicated that they are interested in a partnership of equals in which we support each other. And then he said, we propose a comprehensive framework composed of 4 interconnected strands of action. First, strategic investment in areas with most potential for job creation. Second, boosting labor market research. Third, improving investment climate and business environment. And fourth, strengthening economic integration and trade within Africa and between Africa and Europe. This new direction, if true, many factors. It should also be good news to a country with a youth bulge and growing numbers of youth without memorialization. President Nkrumah stood for many things, being the first post-independence leader. His Africa must unite, African personality, and the independence declaration that our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent, marked him as a doomed leader. Who talked of Operation Feed Yourself and Grow What You Eat and Eat What You Grow campaigns did nothing to endear himself to those who had an interest in continuing Ghana's dependence on external support. The emergence of severe economic challenges and consequent conflict with my generation, for which we can't apologize enough, meant that the survival of the regime was only a question of time. leader has begun to beyond aid. Our development partners have expressed support for the move. Should we not expect and prepare for pushback in various forms? Is the current economic crisis some such manifestation? Time will tell. Therefore, CFR has its work cut out for it when history is no longer taught as a standalone subject except as a specialized course. Keep repeating themselves. I hope the Nkrumah Center will develop mechanisms for mounting scholarly lectures and symposia, not praise singing and adulation. That would help us to fill the gaps in our knowledge of that great Ghana. Memorializing events of the past would help us keep the lessons of history before us and provide contemporary analysis of our strategic interests. Madam Chair, there's a long conclusion, but since you have heard the body, I believe you don't need me to conclude. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for the erudite and challenging presentation.
How many seconds did you use?
Thank you. May I now invite Mr. Dichi to introduce our special guest.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. You have the floor now.
Excellencies, all the wonderful things you have heard from the reviewer and the issues arising from myself are all here. And I'm sure that we have titillated you enough for you to obtain copies. Contemporary issues in foreign policy, diplomacy and international affairs is duly launched.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure everybody is itching to get their hands on a copy of the book. I believe the copies will be available outside. Thank you, Mr. Shadow. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, your leadership, for an insightful presentation laced with and lubricated with a lot of humor. It was wonderful. Thank you. Obviously, that will make it into the next edition. In fact, it will be the first article, the first piece in the next edition, to which you are all duly invited already. Yeah, something struck me as you were going on about a non-aligned movement. You said it had, it stopped moving. By the way, the book is a mere 200 CDs, just 200 CDs. We'll be delighted if we're able to pay more for one, or buy multiple copies for friends, neighbors, and enemies alike. I'd like to recognize, by the way, just a few people. General Obedakwa, former Chief of Defense Staff, Ambassador Hassan, Dr. Eugene Owusu, Presidential Advisor on SDGs, Ambassador Tenkrang, who is himself a foundation member of the of CFR, of course, and Ambassador Cabral Amehe, Vice President, and Ambassador Hananyako, Ambassadors Hananyako, Ekwa Hinkra, and Jane Gasu are representing the Honorable Foreign Minister and the Chief Director, who are unable to be here and send their sincere apologies. Now I'd like to do a have a short presentation ceremony for a few people and institutions in particular are sponsors. So I would invite Ms. Isuman here to, you bring the books. Yes, please do, quickly. We'll present a handful of copies to GNP, NCA, VRA, and Supreme Concepts, who are partners and sponsors. And I would ask Madam Chair to kindly do the presentation. Where should we do it? Okay. And then we'll also, after that, we'll also present some copies to the contributors who are here as well. And that will be done, yes, and that will be done by Ambassador DK Osei. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Please, ma'am, would like, if you don't mind, to come to the front, please. So, which one is it? This way. Okay. Let me do the institutions first. Okay. So, if there's a representative of the Ministry of, well, there is, I just announced that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would like to hand you a copy. And Madam Chair, Ambassador Chair, will present it. So, a representative of the Foreign Ministry.
Foreign Ministry, Sheriff.
Okay, all right. So the Foreign Ministry, GNPC, we have GNPC here, a rep of GNPC, a rep of VRA, Volunteering Authority. Just get ready if you're here. NCA, National Communications Authority. So that's GNPC. Thank you very much for your support to CFR over the years. National Lotteries Authority, NLA. Petroleum Commission. Petroleum Commission is not here. And Supreme Concepts. Supreme Concepts? They're not here either. Okay. So then I shall move on to the individual contributors, starting with Dr. Muhammad Ibn Chambers. Dr. Eugene Owusu. Dr. Eugene Owusu. Honorable Dr. Emmanuel Bombande. So maybe we'll present to Honorable Bombande, Dr. Bombande, before Dr. Eugene Owusu, who is still making his way through the pews. So that's Dr. Bombande, thank you very much. Dr. Eugene Owusu is next. And then Dr. K.O. Amening. Dr. K.O. Amening. I'd also like to invite Honorable Hackman Owusu Ajiman to receive a copy. And Honorable Osei Eji, former Deputy Foreign Minister and subsequently full Foreign Minister. Okay. Professor Akuya Kwenye here. Professor Akuya Kwenye here. Lieutenant General Obed Akwa. Yes, he's here. He's currently the ambassador in Egypt. He shed the military fatigues for a suit. Professor Mary Chinwe Hesse will bring, yeah, copy, Mrs. Chinrihese. And then Mrs. Agri Orleans will present a copy to herself. The president will present to you, ma'am. Thank you. Oh, there's one more. Mr. Freddie Blake. Yeah, you're. Yeah. Yes. She'll do it for you. Thank you. I think that's it. Thank you.
Proceeding to introduce special guest. You're paying attention to that.
I'm sorry, I was distracted.
I take it that you will now introduce our special guest.
Yes, just before we do that, there's a short video interlude. Now, yes, it's not on the program. It was, this. You have people like Ambassador Cabral here who have veto powers, and after the program was printed, he inserted something. So, oh, it's there. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Apologies. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I've just been told that there's one more copy of the book. Okay. Can you just pause it? Can you pause it for a second so that the context can be established? Thank you very much. Okay. So there's also a copy of the book for her leadership. So if you could just do that. Now I'm going to be introducing Mrs. Chinrihese, who's going to launch the appeal for people like yourselves to do your memoirs. And the idea struck Ambassador Cabral Mehi after he saw a 2-minute clip of an interview I did maybe 20 years ago with then businessman Cyril Ramaphosa. And he suggested to me that I too must write, and went on to suggest that I play this. It's just 2 minutes. So that's the context preceding my introduction of Mrs. Chinrihese, and then she will then speak to us with regard to launching the Memoirs project. So please go back to the beginning and let's see that.
I'm in business and enjoying it.
So have you tell you
adding value to the growth of our economy.
So have you tell you back?
I am in business right now.
And as you might well know,
I'm in business and I'm enjoying being in business. And as you might well know, I'm a member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC. So I sit on the National Executive Committee, having been elected at the same time I'm a businessman.
So you haven't told me.
It is a good balance for me to be
Are you interested in the
National
presidency?
Executive
So are you interested in the presidency? Once you have that type of involvement of the
Are you interested in the presidency? Once you have
you have
that
a
type of
complete,
involvement
wholesome view
the National Executive and being in business,
of life,
you have a
of the
complete
economy,
wholesome view
and some of the things that need to be done in our country. And what we do include politics. Oh, naturally. I mean, the economy is really about politics as well. Are you interested in the presidency? I mean, given the view that you have now, as you just described,
Are you interested in the presidency? Given the view that you have now, as you just described, you should stand you in good stead for the job.
Okay, so you're not ruling
I'm in business, and as I've said, I'm enjoying being
Okay, so you're not ruling it. You are not ruling out the possibility that you would seek a job.
I am in business. That is a very worthwhile and interesting.
So I don't hear you ruling out the question or interest in the presidency. I don't hear that.
I am in business. Thank you very much.
Well, so that was me and now President Cyril Ramaphosa, 20 years younger, both of us. Okay. And well, the rest is history, as they say. Never say never. So thank you, Cabral, for pushing me. So I'm going to be working on my report as well. And I proceed to introduce Mrs. Mary Chinwe Hesse, and once again I'll keep this with the summary version of so Mrs. Chinwe Hesse is the Chancellor of the University of Ghana, the first woman to be so appointed, and she succeeded her friend and colleague Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. She was the first female Chancellor of the University of Ghana, also the first female resident coordinator, of the UN system and resident rep of the United Nations. And when she became Deputy Director General of the International Labour Organization, she subsequently became Chief Advisor to President John Kufuor, working hand in hand with Ambassador D.K. Osei as part of the triumvirate that held the President on the straight and narrow. She was a member of the Eminent Persons panel responsible for crafting the transition of the Organization of the African Union to the African Union. She's a laureate of the Greasy Peace Prize, referred to as the Asian Nobel Peace Prize, although I believe she's deserving of the Nobel as well. She's the first African woman to receive that honor. And well, she's here to launch this project, and just add that above all, she's also a product of
may I now invite my senior, Mary, to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Lady Chair, and naughty Ambassador D.K. Osei, the other. This is just the last in the line. I hope no more will come. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be very short because we have witnessed a most impressive and thought-provoking ceremony this afternoon, which is the launch of the Council's latest publication, Contemporary Issues in Foreign Policy, Diplomacy, Professor Mensa Bonso, and Dr. Boama. It has all been said. The volume captures so appropriately the raison d'etre for the establishment of the Council on Foreign Relations Ghana. I feel so privileged that I am associated with this important initiative. The Council is already doing such exciting work as it hosts important encounters with distinguished personalities who are masters in their areas of expertise. I want to congratulate the brains behind the establishment of the Council. I think we should recognize them with a clap offering. But I digress. I mean, the work has already been done. But my task here this, shall I say evening now? It's dark out. Is to launch an important project, the CFR Ghana Memoirs Project Fund. I'm flattered by the honor done me by the invitation for me to launch such an important project. Our country, Ghana, has had a checkered history. I don't think anybody would doubt that. We have lived through events which have disrupted an orderly retention of knowledge of actual events in the country. There have been situations where citizens have actually fled into exile with whatever first-hand knowledge they might have accumulated by actually living through or observing activities in the country. Others have just kept mute, not sharing information out of fear, sometimes also out of trauma. In this manner, the country might have lost a good deal of relevant knowledge. Thus, true history of the country has in many instances remained in the hearts and minds of people who have not bothered to put anything on paper for posterity. The situation has led to distortion of facts, when the truth of what truly happened still lies or died in the bosom of actors and witnesses of historical events who failed to share. The country's legacy has therefore run the risk of distortion, and I think we all know that. Since the past has not always been appropriately captured, depriving the country of lessons from past events. And there is no doubt that even many of us in this room, as I look round, will have interesting stories to tell, because we are the ones who have been privileged to be born and have lived in interesting times. Colonial rule. I bet the people in this room, most of them would have been born during the colonial time, although I see many young ones as well. And these have been interesting times. Also, we actually witnessed, a lot of us in this room, the declaration of Ghana's independence. And we have lived through a number of coups d'etats, coup d'etat after coup d'etat, etc. In a state where they would not dare say anything to be quoted for fear of some form of reprisal or revenge from people whose toes might feel stepped upon. The project which is now being launched is intended to encourage people like ourselves in this room and many retired diplomats and other professionals to share their experiences with future generations through writing their memoirs. Indeed, while writing of memoirs may help to preserve the country's legacy and facilitate gaining of some insights into the past, it might offer also an opportunity through traumatic experiences, a sort of catharsis. You know, that happened. Let's bring everything out of the project I'm launching now, which indicates that when certain old people pass on, they take with them a whole library because they didn't capture their life story to share for posterity. May this project minimize such situations in our country, Ghana. I know you are all tired, so I'm going to stop here and just say that it is my privilege to declare the project CFR Ghana Memoirs Project Fund duly launched. God bless. God bless, and thank you all very much for your patience. I'm waiting for everybody's invitation to when they launch their own memoirs. I'm waiting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chancellor. At this stage, I am expected to make a few remarks as chairperson. Firstly, I don't think that there is any more to add. There's any more to say. I cannot myself think of a better way of spending an afternoon of thought-provoking statement. I'm sure you'll all agree with me that we are greatly enriched in our knowledge and perception. I thank the Council on Foreign Relations Ghana for this initiative, and together I feel we can look forward to the next volume of the handbook. On that note, I invite Mr. Sichiado to give the vote of thanks and to reiterate. Are you listening, sir? And to reiterate the invitation to the cocktail which the Council is offering after this event. You have a thought.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Indeed, everyone is invited to the cocktail in the foyer here. Just wanted, wanted to also just quickly recognize Ambassador Kuat Dansua, Ambassador Brandful, and my friend Brigadier Richard Ado as well. So thank you. I think what remains really to be done is to say a big thank you to everyone for coming, especially the chairperson, Mrs. Agri-Olens, your leadership, Mrs. Professor Dr. Henrietta Mensah Bonsu, Mrs. Chinri Hesse, Dr. Boama, and of course our president, Ambassador DK Osei, and every one of you. You're just as special. Thanks, and join us for drinks after here. Have a good night. And looking forward to reading Dr. Chambers' book. Looking forward to reading your book. Your memoirs. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. There is an important announcement that I omitted. One quick. Can I have your attention, please? Can I have your attention for just a second? Your attention for just a second. We've actually just received a donation, an anonymous donation of 20,000 Ghana cedis into the CFR account for the Memoirs project. 20,000 cedis, and we would like to ask you here that the account is open and there's a lot of room for further donations. Thank you very much. Oh.
In 2019, Ghana established her first policy think tank dedicated to foreign policy and international affairs. The Council on Foreign Relations CFR Ghana, an independent, private, non-partisan and non-profit institution, was officially inaugurated on February 26, 2019 by President Akufo-Addo. But it was a dream brought to fruition by a handful of like-minded individuals led chiefly by the journalist and diplomat Ambassador Cabral Blay Amihie and public servant and veteran diplomat Ambassador DK Osei, who is the founding president of CFR Ghana. Other founding members of CFR Ghana include Brigadier General Francis Esiedu Ajimfra, Ambassador Lawrence R.A. Satu, Egbert Fable Jr., Abraham Agbozo, the late Kojo Benti Enchil, Kweku Sechiado, and Dr. Linda Ekweopoma Dakwa. Founding members spent many hours on weekends huddling and haggling over the fine points of corporate governance, the law, diplomacy, communications and public relations, and even the aesthetics and nuances of typefaces, fonts, and logos. Despite its 2019 birth, CFR Ghana's conception occurred much earlier, with its official registration at the Registrar General's on February 23, 2011. After 8 years during which no foreign affairs think tank emerged among civil society organizations, its originators decided this was an idea whose time had come.
We find ourselves in a world confronted by a multiplicity of challenges. We continue to witness a recession, a regrettable recession, in the spirit of multilateralism, together simultaneously with the growth of globalization and an upsurge in the digital revolution. These challenges constitute opportunities and risks, which have the potential to revolutionize foreign policy and international relations. In light of these, we need a strong, reputable policy think tank to ensure that stakeholders are well informed, to enable them contribute meaningfully to the defense and promotion of the national interest. I would therefore expect CFR Ghana to assist us to keep our eyes on the ball in a manner that allows us to deal with critical challenges at home, on the continent, and amongst multilateral institutions. Not only are you expected to be facilitators in improving policy making and execution, but you're also to act as agents of social change.
I am certain, Mr. President, that once you set the record of high regard for the Council's work, succeeding presidents regardless of their political inclination, will want to keep up the institution and tradition.
In the last 24 months, the CFR Ghana has struck a formidable partnership with both state and non-state actors to deepen public discourse, share knowledge about national, regional, continental and global conversations, and make inputs.
Our aim is to make the continent a better continent. Our aim is to, through foreign policy, bring economic development to Ghana. If in our modest way we're able to engage the real players, for them to take our views into consideration, and we see an improvement as a result of our contribution, the Council will be very, very happy.
The Council also serves as a platform for public consultations and reference point for many international organizations and diplomacy-focused institutions, including the Foreign Ministry.
It brings on board different perspectives to engage on international, contemporary international issues such as multilateralism, regional and continental matters, integration, peace and security, and so on and so forth. They really have contributed to demystifying foreign relations, what it stands for, what it means. And they've also done well in correcting that erroneous impression that diplomacy is about whining and dining.
As the Ivory Coast, this protracted ITLOS case. After of the ruling, the two presidents came together and built a solid and admirable relations. I can tell you that all those feats were not just achieved by one person. There's a multitude of experienced foreign relation personalities behind, giving the needed counsel and advice. You can look at what happened at Togo, a near clash. Yet, eventually, we restored calm. Recent times, what happened at Ivory Coast again, in terms of their elections. Again, we restored peace. These things are not happening by chance. I'm telling you confidently. It's happening as a result of conscious decisions made by leadership with the support of dependable personalities manning the foreign councils.
Modeled on well-established think tanks such as the Council of Foreign Relations in the USA and Chatham House in the United Kingdom, the Council on Foreign Relations Ghana is carving a niche for itself.
We're looking forward to expanding our activities, like international collaboration, expanding our publications agenda, because one of the aims of the Council is to encourage its members to publish their memoirs, because as you know, there are many distinguished Ghanaian diplomats and international civil servants who have a story to tell, whose memoirs can contribute to the training of our diplomats and also contribute to sharing their experiences with an aim of improving our foreign policy formulation.
One of CFR Ghana's main channels for public engagement is its distinguished guest lecture series. This is a forum for high-profile international personalities to share their perspectives on a variety of topics and themes. The main speaker in the series was British politician and diplomat Baroness Valerie Amos, at the time Director of the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London.
The global financial crisis resulted in banks being bailed out, then countries cut public spending and raised taxes to pay for it. If we look at Europe, major EU member states imposed massive debt obligations on poorer nations like Greece and Portugal, and people suffered. Workers lost their jobs, industries were decimated, communities devastated, relationships changed forever. That was the price of austerity. No wonder that tens of millions of people are now demanding different leaders. from outside the political establishment, who understand their day-to-day lives, their struggles and their fears, and who understand the way that local and national identities have been challenged by the social and economic changes we are seeing.
Baroness Amos currently heads University College, Oxford. She was followed by Ghanaian diplomat Dr. Mohamed Ibn Chambers, who is the UN Secretary General's Special Representative for West Africa and the Sahel.
Given the current and future dynamics and ramifications of conflict, no single entity, be it state, regional, international, or non-state, is capable of responding to these challenges alone. Several actors are indeed necessary, and building a coalition of the like-minded and committed is unavoidable. The prospects for peace are therefore ultimately defined by the quality of partnerships as measured by inclusivity, consensus, capacity, and anchored on national, not merely state, ownership. Given the potential implications of dynamics in neighboring countries on peace and security in Ghana, it is imperative that the country pays particular attention to its regional diplomacy through effective partnerships within the framework of ECOWAS.
Next was the Ecuadorian politician and president of the 73rd session of the UN General Assembly, Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, and then a European Commission Vice President and former Prime Minister of Finland, Jyrki Katainen. They covered such themes as Brexit implications for Africa, multilateralism, security in West Africa, Africa-EU alliance and peaceful democratic elections in West Africa. The coronavirus pandemic destabilized many economies across the globe in the year 2020, killing hundreds of thousands of people and ruining even the strongest economies. But CFR Ghana did not let the pandemic get in its way as it adapted to the new reality. Consequently, it hosted a lecture with limited physical attendance given by the Nigerian Nobel Literature Laureate Wole Soyinka on the topic Afro-Pessimism Against Horizons of Ebri Optimism.
Why are our leaders, even at the expense of internal cohesion, so stuck on power? From time to time, as I keep saying, there are the positive areas, zones, but then we become complacent and we get very cruelly punished for our over-optimism. And we ask, isn't it much safer to be thoroughgoing pessimists so that we're not unpleasantly surprised?
It also hosted the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Mrs. Amina Mohammed, fully online from New York on the topic Multilateralism at 75. What next? Another area treated by the Council captured COVID-19 and its impact on global affairs with Ambassador William Awinado Kanyirege, who is a CFR Ghana member and Ghana's former High Commissioner to Nigeria and Ambassador to Ethiopia, and Mr. Ken Thompson, CFR Ghana member and Chief Executive of Dalex Finance, as lead discussants. A CFR Ghana member and a former director of the Economic Commission for Africa, Professor Techua Menu, and Director, Western Africa Division, UN Department of Political and Peace-Building Affairs and Peace Operations, Dr. Abdel Fattah Musa, led a discussion on the topic Towards Peaceful Elections 2020 in West Africa.
The Council has done a tremendous job this past 2 years. I think the Distinguished Lecture Series fills a void in the discourse about foreign affairs in the country. It also fills a void in intellectual discourse generally, not even specific to foreign affairs, but also gives us a leeway to look at the issues that affect our country and then affects the sub-region. We've had fairly distinguished personnel on the series, and I think that will continue to invite such caliber of people to shed